Okay, rant review. Hello. Today I'm going to be talking about this book, Everything for Everyone, An Oral History of the New York Commune, 2052 to 2072. This book is a utopian novel based around the rise of a communist utopia in New York City after the fall of society. And this specifically is documenting, for like an anniversary, oral histories from a bunch of people that lived through the fall of the society and the rebuilding of the new society. I have a lot of concerns and strong feelings. Okay, so I am going to start with the positives for this book review, because I think it's always good to start criticism with what I liked or what I thought was good. So this book is extremely clever, extremely well written. I really liked the format. It's set up as a series of interviews with all these different people. So it's structured and just reads just like you would read any kind of oral history, an actual oral history. So about something that happened in the past. And I love the introduction. It really just set the world and it set the vibe, and it really read like a real oral history. Like it almost felt like someone traveled back in time and handed me this book about 2052 to 2072 and was like, here, read about the history of the future. And I thought that was so clever, and I thought the concept was good. And I especially thought the writing, each voice felt very unique and organic, and I just really appreciated the structure and the writing of this book. I'm a gender abolitionist, and maybe that's a video I'll go into at some point, but I do think that the authors did a phenomenal job showing the evolution of a genderless society. Great job of showing a post-gender society. Most of the characters are gender non-conforming in some way, or they are, trans or non-binary, and they've really kind of demonstrated how society has kind of let go a lot of those traditional gender expectations. So I thought that was really cool and really well done, and clearly an important part of one of the author's experiences and advocacy. And as a caveat, before we get into the rest of the book, I'm not a communist, and I'm not well-researched or well-read in communist theory. And so I'm only approaching this book from an element of how it made me feel, or concerns that I had while reading it. I'm sure if I was more up on communist theory, that I could maybe even pull more information out of this book or understand maybe certain sections more than I did. But I'm going to just approach this book as I found it and as it elicited emotions in me. Okay, what you've all been waiting for. This book made me have lots of feelings, and I struggled to finish this book partially or mostly because I had to process a lot of emotions and a lot of feelings and a lot of kind of negativity that arose in me while reading it. And the book is very much written as a utopia. It's written as like ideal. And so it took me a long time to kind of like pull those threads and figure out why I felt so frustrated, upset, distraught throughout reading of this book. I'll touch on this a few more times, but let's start with the monoculture of thought. So the authors did a fantastic job of trying to tell stories from diverse gender and racial backgrounds, from diverse places and experiences, but I found a little that every person that they interviewed had a monoculture of thought. So yes, they were diverse, but their thoughts weren't diverse. And excluding the Palestinian chapter, which we'll discuss later. None of the ethnic voices really seem to have any cultural distinction for one ethnic group over the other. They all kind of blended together in indistinguishable form. Essentially, all of the characters had the same goals, the same thought structures, the same expectations, the same worldview. So there's a monoculture of thought, and there also was some allusions throughout the book to monocultures that were kind of glossed over, ethnostates that were kind of glossed over and they kind of moved on really quickly. For example, the Native American tribes seem to be structured as more of ethnostates. The New Afrikaans Republic, which wasn't elaborated on much at all, but there seemed to be an implication to me that it might have been an ethnostate. And obviously the Palestinian story arc very much sounded like an ethnostate. And I really am distrustful. I unpacked this. It took me a while to unpack this, but I am very distrustful of the concept of ethnostates and monocultures. And I feel like it's very concerning to me how little was addressed with the ethnostates and how it was kind of just left alone. The amount of times ethnostates were kind of glossed over was really disturbing to me, because I feel like ethnostates kind of naturally lead into expulsions of ethnic groups and genocides. And so the fact that there was all these kind of like references to ethnostates that existed still in this utopian world, but no addressing of any issues with ethnostates as a structure, made me very, very uncomfortable. The chapter that kind of alluded to land back for the Native Americans and the First Peoples and the indigenous peoples in America was essentially a PTSD flashback, and was very confused and confusing, and made me feel like the authors didn't really understand the principles of land back, and therefore couldn't explain it very well, and therefore kind of glossed over the concept of land back. And that made me kind of disappointed, because I feel like that's an important topic that should have been addressed with more depth and more care. And I'm definitely not an expert in these principles or policies or concepts. And I'm not a cultural editor, and I'm not, part of the Native American, indigenous peoples, First Peoples communities. But I worry that maybe there wasn't a cultural editor on this book. And why I say that is because, especially in the way that the Native American communities, the communities that sprung up from the tribes and the reservations in America were described, to me felt very enlightened savage, which is a trope, but I worry that maybe the book wasn't really well edited or well reviewed to make sure that they were, handling some of these more cultural stories with care. And from the indigenous peoples story to the next story we're going to talk about, had a strong kind of emotional implication for me, which makes me think that maybe there wasn't a lot of cultural editing done. Okay. I found the section on the Chinese American internment offensive, tone deaf, and really, really, really not thought through, or at the very least inconsiderate of the implications of what was being said. in the section, they gloss over exactly what situation led to the Chinese Americans being targeted for these internment camps, these work camps. And then the authors, quickly kind of spun it around and basically talked about how the elders in the community like eventually started, striking and refusing to work, refusing to be slaves, and then they were able to get out because the Americans withdrew. And as a direct descendant of the Japanese Americans that were interned and posted in Arizona during World War II, I found this section very offensive. It took me a while to realize why I found it so offensive. Like, there was like this visceral tensioning inside of me. And I think initially a part of it was just, obviously intergenerational trauma. I'm still very sensitive about the topic in general. But I think part of it was the implication that if my family had just like organized and communized and unionized, that somehow would have freed us and fixed all of our problems. And really in the book, it doesn't fix their problems either. They're still struggling because the whole world's collapsing around them. But the implication that like if my family had just organized better, that we could have been freed, was offensive and really, really upsetting for me. And just, again, makes me kind of think that this wasn't read by a cultural editor, or that they didn't get a lot of feedback from these minority groups they were supposedly representing in the book. I guess one more thing. I guess it also felt like they wanted to kind of reference the internment of the Japanese during World War II. They kind of wanted to like allude to this historical event and show it like repeating itself, but they didn't give it any thought on like what the implications of that led to that event, nor kind of the implications of that event, right? It was just very, very hard section for me to read and get through, and I found it just very, very insensitive. Okay, last major point. Last major problem. I promise this is the last one, and then we'll do another plus and tie it all together with a little bow. So one of the authors has written another book and written extensively about the concept of family abolition. And it showed. At no point in this book can I remember any family unit being healthy. All family units are broken. All familial relationships are broken. And it just, the vibe I got from pretty much story after story was that we really should just communally raise children. Like people can have kids or whatever, but like they should be, at one point they're like a nursery, and like the family, like the children are all kind of raised up in the nursery by a circuit of people that just want to play with the babies. And then they have like common schooling and and then there's places for the kids to go so that they don't have to live with adults. And it was very much set up to be voluntary. I will give them that. This is all supposed to be voluntary, and it was supposed to be kind of choice-based family units. But I think there's another implication here that wasn't really explored. And I'm admittedly not up on family abolition. Again, I'm not a communist. I'm not up on a lot of these theories. And so maybe I'm just misunderstanding kind of a core concept. But I feel like if you're going to talk about this kind of like dissolution of the family unit in this book, you can't just say, and it'll be better, right? Like, I feel like there needs to be some explanation on addressing some of these issues I'm about to bring up. Now, I do not disagree that the nuclear family is fucked and we need to have a larger support network to support the raising of children, and that we should have community support for families. No arguments there. The system as it is right now, in the United States especially, is shit. We should have more physical support for families, emotional support for families, financial support for families, just all around more support for raising young children. But especially the gestation chapter, to me, didn't read it. I mean, this is a utopian novel, so everything is written like everything is perfect now, and this is the way, like, this is the best way of executing this society, right? To me, it read as a rose-colored glasses over a eugenics program. And I was extremely disturbed. I talked about this section to several people because to me, I was like, this is a eugenics program, and they're talking about it like it's all about free choice and free will and da da da, and like, but it's a eugenics program. You get that, right? Where are the eggs coming from? Where are the sperm coming from? Who gets to decide whose eggs and sperm are used? Right? Like, especially since it sounds like so many people are being artificially inseminated now. Like, is there a bank? Who contributes to the bank? Who's allowed to contribute to the bank? How are you to determine who gets to contribute to the bank? I have a question. If you're separated from your cultural heritage and you're raised in kind of communal schools, communal like nurseries and things, where's your link to your cultural heritage? Your racial cultural heritage? Who decides what is taught in these kind of communal schools, these communal structures? And this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? About my concerns about the monoculture in the book, how everyone seemed to think the same, right? So everyone kind of thinks the same, and if your education system is everyone thinking the same, and everyone's raised kind of the same, and everyone's kind of the same, what happens to the minority ethnic groups and the minority ethnic cultures? Where do they go? They just kind of disappear, right? I mean, like, that's kind of the implication with the structure that's set up, especially in the gestation chapter, right? Like, all those minority cultures, all those like small groups, some small communities, small unique racial communities, they just kind of disappear. This section to me read like native boarding schools and forced sterilization programs. Like, and I understand that they're writing this like, oh, well, no, everyone gets to choose, and everyone who can have kids can, and we can put artificial wombs in people that weren't born with wombs so that they can have kids too, and it's all free and social and like voluntary, and that's great, and I want it to be voluntary, but the way this section read to me was not that. I was very concerned about how it was being executed in such a way to ensure that you weren't just removing impurities from the genetics of the community, right? Like, it just, visceral tension about that the whole time through. Especially when it's like, well, most people are just like artificially inseminated, it's like, okay, but like, how are you making sure that there's a cultural heritage or a racial heritage or any kind of like diversity of thought? So much effort went into making this book show gender inclusivity, show gender identity being supported and freeing and opening up and kind of disappearing. And so little emphasis was put on ensuring a supportive multicultural community, right? It felt like lip service to that these were different ethnic groups, but they didn't feel like different ethnic groups, except for the Palestinians. I think they did a good job on the Palestinian section. That had some cultural weight to it. But then they ended up in a monoculture, right? They ended up in an ethno-state. So it wasn't like a white ethno-state. It was a Palestinian ethno-state. And I have concerns. I have a lot of concerns around ethno-states and the amount that it seemed to kind of gloss over or even tacitly support ethno-states in this book. So I was talking to someone about this book and ranting about how frustrated I was, and they brought up a really good point. This is a utopian novel. It's about a utopian future, and you can't judge utopian novels based on how they got to their utopian future. You judge them based on what they're trying to say about what does the utopian future look like. And I'm going to compare this book to Brave New World. I think one thing that this book does really well and is kind of very brave of the authors is they're writing a near future utopia. They're writing about the real problems that we're having in our today, right now, and they are projecting them out only a few years, right? The commune is 2052 to 2072, right? That's not that far in the future. And they're talking about legitimate issues we have right now. And I think that was one of the reasons that I had such a strong visceral reaction to some of these problems, is because they are real problems that we're dealing with. They are real struggles that we have in the world today. And the authors bravely tried to address those in a near future kind of way, as opposed to like Brave New World, which is in some kind of amorphous, distant future. And therefore it kind of decouples a little bit of the emotion from the actual action, right? And I think the authors really cared very deeply about gender identity and gender fairness and creating a post-gender society, and clearly put a lot of effort into making sure that that was properly captured in this utopian future that they were building. My concern is, I think they put so much effort into creating a post-gender society that they somewhat glossed over and neglected how they had also created kind of monocultural ethno-states. And I find that really disturbing and very upsetting. In conclusion, I think this book, again, like I said at the beginning, extremely well written, extremely clever, extremely brave, they had a very strong, confident voice when it came to the topics that they cared about, the topics that they had a good, deep knowledge about. But in doing that, they glossed over a lot of topics that I think mattered a lot, and maybe mattered more to me than them. But I feel like it's good to point out when maybe you miss the mark on a few points. With that, again, Everything for Everyone, a oral history of the New York Commune 2052 to 2072. And if I was going to rate the book based on what it is as a utopian novel that's laying out this kind of ideal future that the authors had in mind, and not get so caught up in the nitty-gritty details, I think this is a 3 or 4 star book, because it's very well written, it's very clever. I love the formatting. I adored the formatting. The voices of the characters are all very unique and interesting and engaging. And they did build out a near future utopia. If I'm going to give it my instinctual rating based on my feelings about this book, I'd probably give it 1 star, because again, as I've talked about, I found it very viscerally upsetting. I found it, the fact that they glazed over so many things, disturbing. It seemed like a tacit approval of certain things that I don't necessarily think they wanted to be tacitly approving of. And yeah, so let's say 3 stars. With that, thank you for listening to my crazy review for the day, and Namo Amida Butsu. If you liked this and you want more like this, please do the algorithm thing and let me know so I know to keep making stuff like this. Also, please recommend books that I should read, or maybe I should read more communist theory. I don't know. Tell me below what else I should read. Bye-bye. I have a lot of concerns. The end.